On June 15, 2003, the desert of southeastern Utah lay silent under a merciless sun. The kind of silence that feels ancient, as if it has existed long before humans learned how to name fear. Aron Ralston, 27 years old, parked his blue Nissan truck near the entrance of Blue John Canyon and stepped out with the confidence of someone who had never truly been afraid of being alone. He didn't leave a note. He didn't call anyone. He didn't believe he needed to. Solo trips were normal for him. He trusted his strength, his instincts, and the idea that preparation mattered more than luck. He entered the canyon carrying little more than a small backpack. Inside were a rope, a handheld video camera, 2 burritos wrapped in foil, about a liter of water, and a cheap multi-tool with a dull blade. He expected a short adventure, something to fill the day before driving home. The canyon walls rose around him like rust-colored ribs, narrow and twisting, carved over millions of years by water that no longer flowed. His shoulders brushed stone as he moved deeper. His footsteps echoed softly. He joked to the camera, smiling, relaxed, alive. By midday, the heat settled heavily between the canyon walls. Aron reached a tight chute cluttered with massive boulders jammed together as if the earth itself had exhaled and forgotten to pull them back. He stepped down carefully, testing his footing the way experienced climbers do. Then, without warning, one rock shifted. In less than a second, his foot slipped, his body lunged forward, and a boulder weighing nearly half a ton broke loose. It fell with him. His right arm disappeared between stone and canyon wall, crushed instantly. There was no dramatic crack, no immediate agony. Just shock, raw and paralyzing. Aron looked down, confused, pulling instinctively. Nothing moved. The rock had settled, final and absolute. When the pain finally arrived, it came all at once, white-hot and overwhelming, tearing a scream from his chest that echoed uselessly against the stone. No one answered. The canyon absorbed everything. At first, he believed it would pass. He laughed nervously, talking to himself, telling his body to calm down. He pulled again and again until his muscles shook. He tried climbing the canyon wall with one arm, smearing blood across the rock before slipping back down. He rested, breathing hard, convincing himself that another hiker would come by. Someone always came by, but no one knew he was there. No one knew to look. As the sun climbed overhead, the canyon became an oven. Sweat soaked his clothes. His water level dropped quickly. He screamed until his throat burned, then screamed again and again, until his voice broke. The only reply was silence. When night finally arrived, fear settled in fully. He turned on his headlamp and saw his trapped arm clearly for the first time, swollen and purple, crushed beyond anything he could fix. He understood then that this wasn't a short delay. This was a sentence. He recorded himself on the camera, forcing steadiness into his voice, explaining where he was, what had happened, unsure if anyone would ever see it. He rationed his water, took tiny sips, ate half a burrito, and tried to sleep sitting upright with his arm pinned, muscles cramping, nerves screaming. Above the canyon, stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the man breaking beneath them. The second day was worse. His arm swelled further, flesh pressing painfully against unmovable stone. Pain became constant, unrelenting. He tried everything he could think of. He built a crude pulley with his rope. He chipped at the boulder with his multi-tool until the blade dulled completely. He wedged his legs against the walls and pushed with everything he had. Nothing moved. By afternoon, his water was almost gone. He began hearing things that weren't there. Voices, footsteps, rescue that never came. He filmed goodbye messages then, apologies.confessions, love spoken out loud for the first time in years. For the first time, he said the words he had been avoiding. He admitted that he was going to die there. By the third and fourth days, time blurred. He drank his own urine to stay alive. His arm began to lose sensation, nerves dying slowly, which terrified him more than the pain ever had. He talked to the canyon walls to keep himself sane. He replayed memories of friends, family dinners, ordinary moments that now felt impossibly precious. He dreamed of water so vividly that waking felt cruel. On the fourth night, something shifted inside him. Not hope, but clarity. Cold, terrifying clarity. He understood that no one was coming, and that the only path out of the canyon required an unthinkable price. He stared at the multi-tool resting in his hand. Its small, dull blade never meant for anything like this. He cried until his body shook violently, until there was nothing left. When morning came on the 5th day, he woke strangely calm. His arm was numb, lifeless, already beginning to decay. He whispered the words quietly, as if saying them too loudly might break something fragile inside him. He chose life. He positioned the blade and prepared to do what survival had demanded. When the morning light crept into the canyon on the 5th day, Aron Ralston felt something unfamiliar settle over him. It wasn't courage. It wasn't peace. It was inevitability. His right arm no longer felt like part of his body. It hung there, trapped and swollen. The skin stretched dark and tight, the nerves silent. He touched it with his left hand and felt almost nothing. That frightened him, but it also told him the truth he could no longer ignore. His arm was already leaving him. His body knew it before his mind was ready to accept it. He thought of his family. He thought of the life he had lived, believing strength was measured by independence, by how little you needed others. He thought of all the warnings he had ignored because nothing bad had ever happened before. He whispered to the canyon, not asking for forgiveness, not asking for rescue, but acknowledging the choice that remained, life or certainty of death. There was no third option. He examined his multi-tool again. The blade was barely longer than his thumb, dulled from days of chipping uselessly at stone. He tested it against his skin and flinched. His breathing quickened. His body revolted at the idea before his mind could form the thought clearly. He tried to imagine rescue again, tried to imagine the rock somehow shifting on its own, but the canyon remained unchanged, unmoved by hope or denial. He understood then that cutting through bone was impossible. The blade wasn't strong enough. His hands weren't strong enough. But he remembered something else. When he had fallen, he felt a snapping sensation in his arm, deep inside. Not a clean break, but fractures. If he could break the bones himself, he might not have to cut them. That realization terrified him more than anything that had come before. He braced his feet against the canyon walls, twisted his body, and pulled his arm hard against the boulder. The pain exploded instantly, sharp and blinding, tearing a scream from his throat, so violent it echoed wildly through the canyon. He stopped, gasping, shaking uncontrollably. His vision blurred. He vomited. He rested his head against the stone and cried, sobbing without restraint, his body begging him to stop. But stopping meant dying. He tried again. This time, he focused everything he had left into the movement. He twisted, pulled, leveraged his entire weight, and felt it. Deep, sickening pops as the bones in his forearm fractured one by one. The sound stayed with him, a memory that would never fade. He screamed until his voice was raw and broken, but when it was done, his arm bent where it never should have bent. He didn't give himself time to think. He picked up the blade. Cutting through skin was easier than he expected. The shock numbed him at first, his body protecting itself in the only way it could. But when he reached muscle, the pain returned in waves so intense, his vision went white. He bit down on his own shoulder to keep from screaming himself unconscious. Blood pooled and ran down the rock, warm and slick, carrying away pieces of him that had once been whole. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into eternities. His hands slipped, the blade scraping bone, nerves screaming as they were severed. He talked to himself the entire time, whispering encouragement, giving commands, counting breaths, doing anything to stay conscious. When he reached the last nerve, the pain surged so violently that he later described it as if lightning had struck his entire body at once. He screamed uncontrollably, the sound animal and broken, until suddenly there was nothing left to cut. His arm came free. For a moment, he stared at the space where it had been, unable to comprehend what his eyes were telling him. Then survival took over again. He tied a tourniquet using his rope, clumsy and frantic, tightening it until the bleeding slowed. He pressed his body against the canyon wall, breathing hard, shaking, alive. He laughed then, a broken, hysterical sound that didn't belong to joy, but to disbelief. He had done it. He had survived the impossible. But the canyon wasn't finished with him yet. He still had to get out. He climbed nearly 65 feet down the canyon wall using one arm, exhausted, dizzy, barely conscious. He rappelled using his rope, sliding painfully against stone, his body screaming with every movement. Then he began to walk, for miles, under the burning desert sun. Dehydrated, bleeding, barely able to stand, he staggered through the canyon, fueled only by the knowledge that stopping meant dying. When he finally collapsed near the canyon's exit, 3 hikers appeared in the distance like ghosts made real. They stared at him in horror as he raised his remaining hand weakly and spoke the simplest words of his life: "Help." Hours later, a helicopter lifted him from the desert. Doctors would later say that if he had waited even another hour, he would have died. He had lost 40 pounds, over a quarter of his blood, and an arm, but he was alive. Aron Ralston would later say that the moment he cut his arm free was not the worst moment of his life. The worst moment was realizing how close he had come to never choosing life at all. When Aron Ralston woke in the hospital, the first thing he noticed was the ceiling. White, clean, unmoving. It felt unreal after days of rock pressing against his face, after darkness and heat and blood. His body felt impossibly heavy. When he tried to move, pain surged through him like electricity, sharp and insistent, reminding him that survival always collects its payment. He turned his head slowly and saw the empty space where his right arm had been, wrapped in bandages. Final, undeniable. For a long time he just stared. Doctors came and went, speaking in careful tones. They told him how close he had come to dying, how infection and blood loss and dehydration had nearly taken him even after his escape. They told him he was lucky. The word felt strange to him. Lucky didn't seem to fit a story that involved breaking bones and cutting through his own body in a canyon where no one could hear him scream. But he understood what they meant. He was alive. That fact alone placed him among the fortunate. In the weeks that followed, survival became quieter, but no easier. Pain lingered constantly, a dull ache punctuated by sharp reminders of what was gone. Phantom sensations haunted him. He could still feel fingers that no longer existed, could swear his missing hand itched or curled or reached for something in his sleep. His mind replayed the canyon endlessly. The sound of bone breaking, the moment the blade met nerve, the silence afterward. These memories came uninvited, often in the middle of the night. What surprised him most was the guilt. He felt guilty for surviving when so many didn't. Guilty for putting his family through fear and grief they never asked for. Guilty for the arrogance that had convinced him he didn't need to tell anyone where he was going. Independence, once his greatest pride, now felt like a fragile illusion he had mistaken for strength. Learning to live with one arm was humbling. Simple tasks became obstacles, buttoning a shirt, tying shoes, opening doors. He dropped things constantly. He grew frustrated, angry at his own body, at the slowness of progress, at the stares from strangers who didn't know whether to look away or look longer. Some days, the emotional weight felt heavier than the physical loss. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. Rehabilitation taught him patience. Failure became part of the process rather than proof of weakness. He learned that asking for help didn't make him smaller. It made him human. Friends and family surrounded him, not out of obligation, but out of love. He began to understand that survival was never a solo act, even when it looked that way from the outside. Months later, he returned to the outdoors, not to prove anything, not to conquer anything, just to be there again. The first time he stood beneath open sky with a prosthetic arm attached to his body, he felt a quiet sense of reconciliation. The world had not rejected him. The mountains had not disappeared. They were the same as they had always been. Beautiful, indifferent, honest. What had changed was him. He began to speak publicly about his experience, not to glorify pain, but to strip it of silence. He told people about preparation, about humility, about the thin line between confidence and carelessness. He told them that the most important survival tool is not a knife or rope or map, but the willingness to adapt when reality refuses to bend. Years later, when people asked him how he found the strength to cut off his own arm, he corrected them gently. It wasn't strength, he said. It was love. Love for a life he wasn't ready to give up. Love for moments he hadn't lived yet. Love for people he hadn't said goodbye to. The canyon where it happened still exists. The rock that trapped him still rests there, unchanged. Hikers pass through, often unaware of what occurred in that narrow space between stone and sky. But the story remains, not as a warning carved into rock, but as something quieter and deeper. Sometimes survival is not about fighting harder. Sometimes it is about choosing life, even when that choice costs more than you ever imagined you could give. That is the real American story of Aron Ralston. And it is not about losing an arm. It is about refusing to lose a future. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, share, and comment.